Well, hello everyone. I'm Mike Licona, and this is my best friend, other than my wife, Debbie Licona. This is Gary Habermas here.
I'm not Debbie.
Let's see. Click here when live for stream. Okay. Sorry, this is like the first time I've done this on my own live. Anyway, here's what happens. Gary and Eileen Habermas, every fall, it's for many years, over 2 decades, it was for Labor Day, they would come and spend a week with us, with Debbie and me. And then we've only missed 1 year. I think it was 2021 because Eileen got COVID.
That's correct.
And so
we tried to adjust it, but wouldn't make it.
Yeah, it didn't work. Well, let's see. You've been coming, your first year here was when?
Well,
you and Eileen had just gotten married.
Oh, right? 96.
96?
So it was late fall, I'd be 96.
All right, so this is 28 years. This is year 27. 27 years, more than a quarter century.
Because you got to subtract one.
Yep. So this is our 27th time together. Anyway, we wanted to bless you guys. We wanted to open it up for some live Q&A. And let's see. I hope I can figure out how to do this. Here we go. So, I see some of these. Thank you for the thumbs up there. So, let's see. Gary, why don't we just take a minute and for years, you've been studying the resurrection for years. You were 70. Have you had your 74th birthday yet?
Yes.
What? Okay. So I know you're 11 years older than me. So you're 74 and you started studying the resurrection of Jesus when you were how old?
Well, it makes it sound like I'm making it up, but I was my mid-teens, and I was going through a lot of doubts. And actually, my mid-teens, I stopped and wrote an essay strictly for me. Forget publishing. It was to keep all the facts together in one place. I wanted to keep them together. And besides the 25-page essay, I had 1,600 note cards.
In your mid-teens?
Oh, well, that would be by the time 16, 17, 18 total, 1,600 cards.
Let's see. Back then, I'm trying to think. I was just going out and throwing a rubber ball against the steps out back. Mm-hmm. While you were doing that.
I played plenty of sports, but what happened was in those days, our parents would say, "Come in with the street lights, come on," and we played hockey pretty much every night till it got, sometimes football, but pretty much hockey until it got dark. And when I came in, I had homework to do, and I thought, heck with the homework, I got doubts. Okay. And so I started studying the resurrection every night when I came in from hockey. Hockey and resurrection.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Good combination.
I want to try something here since it's the first time we've done this. Let me go to our YouTube channel on our video manager here just to see if there's something I'm missing that I need to do. I should have asked my buddy Braxton Hunter if he would join us for the first couple of minutes for this. Or David Wood, who's the master of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, where are we when they need them?
All right, hey, Pelagia here. How can Opus Volume Number 2 use group appearances as its primary defense against hallucinations and illumination when group appearances are not a minimal fact nor affirmed by skeptical scholars? Okay, so Doc, are group appearances part of your minimal facts? We'll get into this in a moment. Hold your questions for right now. We'll let Gary answer this, Pelagia. But then everybody else, hold your questions for right now. We'll get to it. So are the group appearances part of the minimal facts? And do skeptical, non-believing New Testament scholars grant them?
They're definitely part of the minimal facts because the minimal facts start with data, with the early creeds all the way up through at least the epistles of Paul. We use the gospel.
So what's the criteria for it to be a minimal fact?
Okay. A minimal fact by definition is an historical fact for which there are enough detailed pieces of data to describe something according to the canons of historicity. Now, we'd have to talk about that, what makes an historical fact. But the first criteria is not skeptics agree or historians agree. Never has been. By far, the first criterion is enough data to call something a fact. And since when the data are very good, critics jump on board and don't argue. Now, here's where the difference lies. Nobody's saying that the critics are going to admit the facts, and therefore they're going to fall on their knees and trust Christ. There are always differences in interpretation of the data. That's where the difference lies. But you have the data for the facts, and then you have that when enough facts coalesce to call something historical, virtually everybody jumps in at that point for the 6 events that I call minimal facts. And by the way, contrary to much popular opinion, the empty tomb has never been one of my 6 minimal facts.
Okay.
I think it's well evidenced, but it's never been one of my.
So it's got to be well
6
evidenced.
facts.
It's got to be well evidenced, and it's got to be granted by a vast majority of scholars.
That's the second, and I'm not just saying.
And
this
what qualifies as a vast majority?
Good question. We've never put. A lot of people say things. We get emails saying, "Oh, you guys say it's got to be over 90%." I don't think I've ever said that. I don't know if you've ever said that. We don't put amounts on it, but I would say something that qualifies as vast majority of critical scholars. And the first criterion is enough evidence to call it a fact. A second one to say most scholars agree with these. And when
most scholars is 50.1%.
I'd say it's much, much, much higher than that.
I mean, one time you told me vast majority would be like around 85%.
I would say.
Are you backing down from that?
I think no. I think over 80 is fair, over 85 is fair, over 90 is fair, and you're going to get different percentages depending on different facts you're talking about. If you're talking about Jesus' crucifixion, that's going to be very, very high.
Sure, but if you're saying vast majority and you're using this as a criterion, did you have any percentage in mind?
Never had a percentage, and I never did a head count. I did a head count on the empty tomb. It's not one of the 6 facts. So
what would you say about?
I do not have a preset percentage. Oh no, we missed by 5%. No,
So
I've never.
in
ever
answer
done
to
that.
Apologia,
Yeah.
you would say that there's strong data for the group appearances.
Exactly, and I'll tell you why. The vast majority of the appearances recorded. If you think the appearances are
So when you
included-
say vast majority of appearances recorded, what do you mean by that?
when the appearances are recorded in the 1 Corinthians 15 Creed, the Acts sermon summaries, and Paul's epistles, other places, the majority of appearances are to groups.
But
Two or more is a
majority is 50.1%.
there's more than 50.1% on, 2 disciples on the way to Emmaus. 2 is a group, but you only have.
I have to be honest with you. I wish you would have defined vast majority and quantified a little bit better than what you've done.
That's good, but I've never done it. I just don't want to be blamed for something I didn't do. And the empty tomb
Yeah, but
was
you've,
never
you've
part
done
of
all
the
these
6.
counts over the years.
Just one on the empty tomb is the only one I can actually count doing it. I can only remember doing a head count. And the reason I say I don't do a count is because empty tomb is not one of the minimal facts.
Okay.
Never has been. I find one of my publications where I find, and you're not saying this, but several do, and you count the empty tomb as one of the minimal facts. Show me where I did that.
All right. So when you say, all right, you're saying a majority. Would you say a strong majority
Yes.
of scholars grant the group appearances?
They grant appearances, and since the majority of the appearance, if you're only going to count appearances to single individuals to get away from groups, I don't think that's fair. And the earliest account,
Well, I think it's fair. I mean, when we talk about answering hallucinations, one of the
Correct.
responses we give group appearances.
right?
So isn't it fair? It's fair for someone like
Right.
Paul Aguirre or someone to say, well, what percentage of scholars today in the field would grant the group appearances?
Yeah, and in the earliest creed in 1 Corinthians 15, 3 of the 5 are the groups. So you can't go in there and say, well, I'm going to take Peter and I'm going to take James, but I won't take the 3 group appearances there. We've got to be fair with the data.
Yeah.
There's 3 groups and 2 individuals in that particular list.
So in answer to Paul Aguirre then, skeptics, he's saying skeptical scholars do not grant the group appearance. And of course, when we're saying this, we're not saying they actually saw the risen Jesus. We're saying that these scholars would say that groups of people simultaneously had an experience they interpreted as the risen Jesus appearing to them, and that these appearances were so similar they thought they saw the same thing. Would that be a fair?
That's fair. Now, just so we're not prejudiced at anything, when you say groups, we're not talking there's going to be 20 or we don't count.
No, it's
2's a group, 5's a group.
okay.
the three groups in the creed, earliest creed.
To the 12, to more than 500, to all the
all
apostles.
the apostles,
Okay.
and 500 at one time.
So, what about skeptical scholars? Would you say those? All right. So, I mean, obviously, you are more familiar with where scholarship is on all these related issues than probably anyone in the world. Are there a lot of skeptical scholars who would grant the group appearances?
I think what they're going to say is this. There are groups of people who thought they saw the risen Jesus. The problem is not how many people were there. The problem. Well, so-and-so thinks there were people there, but doesn't agree with your conclusion. The problem is the interpretation of the data.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. Would you name some skeptical scholars who would say they would grant that there were groups of people who had experiences they interpreted as the risen Jesus appearing to them?
Sure. Ed Sanders is in a group who says, Ed Sanders, he called himself a liberal, taught at Oxford and Duke, and he said that appearances, here's how he says it. The apostles, several of them at one time, he doesn't give, nobody gives numbers. I mean, unless you cite the creed of 1 Corinthians 15, in a few of the Acts sermon summaries. They'll say, there's people there, and they were convicted they saw the risen Jesus. And some of them will say things like this. Were they individually convinced? Were they convinced together? But there were groups who thought they saw something.
All right, give us some names of some non-believing scholars who say that.
I would say, well, Ed Sanders does say, and not only does he say there were these groups, he said he believes, and I won't even go this far, but he thinks it is one of the clearest facts, mark my words, he says that they saw the risen Jesus. He says that at least twice, and then he says, now, I'm not equipped to say how they saw him or what they saw, but they thought they saw the risen Jesus.
Groups.
Together.
Yes.
More than one
Ed Sanders,
together.
and he's a non-believer.
He just calls himself a liberal. I don't know where he is.
What about non-believers?
Well, I can't describe, I can't vouch for what's in someone's heart or I hate to say someone's a believer, someone's not. I don't want to start being judgmental and say someone's a believer, someone's
Well, if
not.
someone like Bart Ehrman comes out and says he doesn't believe Jesus rose from the dead, he's a non-believer.
Correct. Okay. Ed Sanders, I would put Dale Allison in this group. Tom Wright is in this group.
But Dale Allison, I'd say he is a believer.
But he says that a very, he's given credit with them. I know some skeptics who love Dale Allison because I consider him, and he starts his last book by saying, on page 3, right at the beginning, he says, I'm going to give you my view up front. I think the disciples saw Jesus. Jesus saw the disciples.
I know, but he is not a non-believer.
But he's going to come back against those who say they saw Jesus.
I know, but we're asking for non-believers here. Paul Legia is asking for non-believing scholars.
Pincus Lapide.
Did he say the group appearances?
Yes, he did.
Right. He actually believed Jesus rose, too.
He says the 1 Corinthians 15 creed is evidenced by 10 literary arguments that show it's a first century.
So we got Pincus Lapide. What other non-believing scholar?
You did more on Gezer Vermesh than I did, but Gezer Vermesh says there are groups who claim this. Now he's going to beg off on what they mean. He's an agnostic.
No.
He's an agnostic. What happened? Garrett Ludeman says the disciples thought they saw Jesus immediately. Now he thinks they're hallucinations, but that's my point.
That's
you
okay,
can disagree on
he still agrees on the group appearances.
He said they began preaching immediately that they saw the risen Jesus. That's in his books on the crucifixion. He calls himself an atheist.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's.
What about Crossan? What did Crossan think?
Crossan is interesting.
I know he thought altered states of consciousness, or in essence hallucinations, but did he grant group appearances?
He's really interesting. He says the disciples had experiences not unlike appearances of the dead when they have what's called post-death visions or post-death communications. Okay. He says we are creatures who are hardwired to see visions. And then he says, but I don't accept the naturalistic theory. He says that more than once.
Yeah, he
so
says
I don't
that,
think,
but
I think his view's natural, but he says he doesn't accept naturalistic theory. So I think he thinks, here's my guess,
yeah, but go ahead.
I think he thinks that the disciples saw appearances, but it's like what people see when they see a dead loved one the same day. I know a case where a person was buried that day, and people said they saw him that night. They said they saw this woman that night. So
I had a conversation with Dominic before our debate, and
with whom?
Crossan.
Yep.
He told me to call him Dominic.
Oh,
So
sure.
he said, you remember I asked him because I watched that, I listened to his debate with Bill Craig so many times, and you and I had this discussion because Bill Craig said to him, do you believe God exists? Before the Jurassic Age, Bill said, do you think that God existed? And Crossan said, that's a meaningless question. And Bill said, surely it is not meaningless. Do you think that during the Jurassic Age that God existed? And Crossan said, well, I still think it's meaningless, but if I really pushed it, I have to say no. So I take that as him being an atheist. Well, at dinner right before our debate, I said, are you an atheist? And he said, no. I said, so you believe that there's a supreme being out there? He said, no. I said, so do you believe that there is any kind of being who created the universe and life? No. Do you believe in afterlife? No. So you don't believe in any kind of supreme being? No. Well, why? How are you not? How are you not an atheist? How are you defining God? He said, I can't define God. I just can't do it. I said, but you don't believe that there's any kind of a being who's responsible for the creation or sustaining of the no. And so then later on, I said to him right before the debate, after we got our pictures taken outside, I said, so why are you a Christian? And he said he likes the teachings of Jesus. And, Dennis MacDonald said basically the same thing. And so did Stephen Patterson of the Jesus Seminar. All three of them, Jesus Seminar fellows. So, yeah, I don't know what. So if Dominic doesn't really believe there's any kind of supreme being, how is he even thinking that this is not a natural explanation when he's appealing to altered states of consciousness, or what I think is just a fancy term for him for hallucinations?
But he says he specifically said in print he doesn't believe in hallucinations.
Well, he says altered states of consciousness, and the way he describes it in the book, it's hard to distinguish.
We're not Dom. We can only let him define his view, and we can repeat what he said. I don't know how else
to do it. It's like trying to nail Jello to a wall.
I can't say, you said this. You don't believe that. You mean this. So yeah. But there's so many options. You could take an openness view. You could take a finite view of Jesus. You could be he's not this at all. But you could be a Hindu. You could be there are gods that are not infinite and so on.
Okay, so let's say this. This is volume 1 of Gary's magnum opus. This is your life work on the resurrection in 4 volumes.
First of 4.
This is the first of the 4. This has over 1,000 pages in it, so I'm looking at it right here. If you include the bibliography and the indices.
So 1,072.
1,054.
Yeah, but Amazon says, I'm only telling you what they say online.
Well, I'm looking at it right here.
Because there's 18 pages unnumbered in the front.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's their figure. It's not mine.
Yeah. Well, I'm just telling everybody what I'm seeing here.
You go ahead.
But yeah, let's see. What do we have here? 10, 12. There's 12 pages before you get to page 1. So if you add 12 pages to 12 pages to that'd be 66. 1,060. That's pretty good. But if you get rid of or don't count the bibliography and the indices, you're still looking at 1,015 pages. Volume 1. And Volume 2 is out. Just came out in September, right?
Just came out.
Is that about the same size?
No, Volume 2 is about, I would say, about 200 pages shorter. It's like 3 pages short of 900.
Okay. So, well, that's not bad. And that's like only 100 and... Well, okay, I got you if you're looking at the other side. So what's the first volume about?
All 4 volumes are called On the Resurrection. The first volume is called Evidences.
Okay.
Second volume is called Refutations.
All right.
Third volume...
When's the third volume come out?
Not till next May. Since the first one came... They're 8 months apart.
Okay.
The first one just came up. The third volume is a research volume. We don't engage in the views. I say we. My longtime research assistant, Ben Shaw, I gathered, well, it's Ben's figure, 95% of the data. Ben edited it by retyping. We had to cut down from 1,500 to about 1,000 pages for volume 3. But it's a who's who on where people are on key resurrection questions. Almost never do we jump in and give a view of our view. If they teach, we have a section, hallucinations. You teach hallucinations, you go down as hallucinations. We don't bicker with you. If you find somebody who teaches a swoon, they're a lot fewer and far between, but we just say so-and-so teaches a swoon. We don't give...
Gotcha.
Now,
this is volume 3.
Volume 3. It's a kind
volume
of...
2 was naturalistic explanations?
Yes, it's called Refutations.
Refutations. And what's volume 4?
4 is something that I wanted to add. I've done some books on the resurrection being the center of theology and practice, but a lot of people say in reviews, hey, all this guy talks about is evidence, when he's going to do some pastoral stuff. So volume 4 has 2 major sections. Resurrection worked into a Christian worldview. What's it say about worldview? And what's it say about pastoral issues? Dealing with doubt, funerals, the suffering. What about suffering and resurrection? Really, and it's written, you'll notice a difference in volume 4 between part 1 and part 2, worldview questions, versus us having less references, less debate, and more discussion about what resurrection means for the practical life, practical Christian life.
Okay. All right,
So,
cool.
Theology and Practice is volume 4.
Well, I've said about Gary that if there's only one person in this world, there's only one person who knows more about resurrection than Gary, and that's Jesus.
I did not say that. In fact, so everybody knows, Mike called me on the phone and said, I was asked to write this blurb. I just wrote it, and here's what I said. And he read it, and I said, you are kidding. And he said, no, I'm not kidding. I wrote that. I said, you're really going to send that in? You shouldn't send that in. He goes, already done. I pushed the send button before I called you. So, you know, he's a great friend. He's being very kind, but I did not say that. And I wouldn't say that. In fact, give Mike some credit. I said to Mike, Mike, you've got Peter, you've got James, the brother of Jesus. What do you do with these people? And he goes, for crying out loud, those people were martyred in the 60s. Do you think do you think stuff on the resurrection stopped in 65 AD? So that was our early conversation.
All right, let's jump into some questions here. Okay, I'm going to try to take them in the order they were giving. First, Navigator says, serious question, what do you both do to look so young? Hey, thanks a bunch about that.
What do we do with what?
What do we do to look so young?
I think you're not talking about me.
All right, let's see. Let's go. Question. Some people believe Jesus was sprinkled, fulfilling priesthood. Thoughts? From Humbled Clay. I don't know what that means.
Sprinkled with what?
Some people believe Jesus was sprinkled, fulfilling priesthood.
I don't know how it fulfills priesthood. I don't know what kind of priesthood. I don't know what kind of sprinkling.
Humbled Clay, if you would retype that, maybe just
clarify.
To clarify. We'll look at that. All right, let's see. Here's one. It's only the minimal fact itself that has to be affirmed by virtually all scholars, not necessarily every piece of data you use to establish the fact. Is that correct?
That's a great point. It's not, I use 6 minimal facts, and I say it clearly. Read the new volume, read the old volume. It says 6 facts and the data that make those facts. So there's more. But somebody could say, I'm just making something up. You've got this minimal fact. You've got 10 pieces of data. I disagree with 2 of them. What do you do with the other 8? I'm okay with those. Okay, well, then I think we've got enough to call. You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. I'm not saying everybody agrees with everything. And secondly, for such a short time on the air already, 3 times already, we've said the big difference between believers and unbelievers, you can admit the data and disagree on the interpretation. We fully acknowledge that. And we don't say, I want to be clear, because every once in a while someone writes, they say the empty tombs part of it, never was. They'll say, somebody did write to me, more than one somebody, and said, there's no way the critical scholars admit the resurrection. You say they admit it. No, I don't. I don't say they admit the resurrection. I let them define themselves.
Yeah.
But they can disagree with, and if they say they don't believe it, I take them at their word. That's why I was a little bit slower earlier about trying to say what's in their heart and where they go on this. Okay. So we have facts, but we disagree on interpretations.
All right. Matthew R., thank you for the super sticker. All right, let's see. Okay. Oh, hey, thanks, Paul Agia, for the super chat. Appreciate that, man. Really do. All right, let's see. What else do we got here? All right, Luke Bowman asks, ever had anxiety about not being in the right church? If so, any advice?
I'm very open about this. I'm a 60s guy. I've said many times, I say to my own graduate students, I say to my own school, I don't shy away from this. I don't think the name on your church is anywhere near as important as where you are vis-a-vis Jesus. One of my best friends is a Greek Orthodox priest with, by the way, sorry, he's Russian Orthodox with a PhD in philosophy. And we had a discussion one time, and he said, I totally agree with you. It's not if you're Orthodox, if you're Protestant, if you're Catholic. It's what do you do with Jesus? Where are you in your heart, not what sign is over your door. I believe that with all my heart. Does that do it, or is there more to it?
No, that's it. As far as my thought on it, yeah, in terms of denomination, I don't care about that. But I'll tell you something. This was when I was in graduate school back in the fall of 1985. My main professor back then was Ron Sauer, who was F.F. Bruce's final doctoral student. And so Dr. Sauer had maintained contact with F.F. Bruce. And I asked if I could ask Professor Bruce some questions. And he said, sure. And he gave me his address. And I wrote him. And, hey, I was, when you're in grad school and stuff, you're still young, whatever. I was 24 at that point.
You didn't even expect people to respond.
No, I mean, there's no email, right? I mean, this is probably what, 1985, 1984, something like that. And I asked him, I'm still trying to figure things out. I'm growing in my faith, or all this. And I said, hey, do you think Catholics are Christians? Are they going to be in heaven? Now today, yeah. So, and I said, what about Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses? And Professor Bruce responded, and he said, well, I think Catholics are pretty much, the Gospels is pretty much the same, although they've gone a little off track with some things historically. So he says, I really don't have problems with that if they're really following the Gospel. He said, with Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, that's a little bit different. He says, I think we're going to see some Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses in heaven. But then he turned it on me and he says, take heed to where you stand. I thought,
you let him to take a stand lest he fall. Huh?
Yeah, I thought, that's pretty cool. I know some people get upset with me now, but I know some Catholics, and I'm just as sure about their relationship with the Lord as I am my own. So, yeah, are there some Catholics who aren't believers? Yes, I mean, are genuine. Yes,
are there
but
Baptists?
There are Protestants.
Anybody who's
that's
not
exactly
believer.
right.
Yes.
All right, so I'm with you on that. I want to follow the gospel. All right, do you guys think Jesus actually said before Abraham was, I am? If not, what was the author of John trying to do by adding in such a huge claim?
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, a lot of people don't like what I say about this, but so
that's why you're talking.
Yeah, it's like, but that's okay, I don't claim to be right on all these things.
No,
I am just trying to. I want to get it right.
Yeah.
But where I am right now, Johannine specialists acknowledge that that John's gospel takes liberties and recast Jesus' words using his own words. I mean, I could go on. You got Darrell Bach and others that say John often took what Jesus said implicitly, and he recast it as Jesus saying explicitly. And you've got Craig Blomberg, who is a Johannine scholar, who's more conservative than I am. And Blomberg says that he'll say that when it comes to what did Jesus say, the things reported in John's gospel, he likes to talk about it like the Jesus seminar, casting these beads in there. So red means Jesus said these things. Pink, Jesus said something like this. Same message. He's communicating the message. And then there's gray. Jesus
Probably
probably communicated the idea. And then black, he said nothing like this.
Yeah.
And Blomberg says that the Gospel of John has, I think he says, a few red, much pink, some black, some gray, and nothing that can be shown to be black. So, I'd go with that and say, yeah, did Jesus say before Abraham was, I am? I don't know if he said that. I think that there's some reasons to think that, he may not have said that. But
you mean literally? You mean straightforward?
Yeah, literally with those words, because you don't find anything like a direct claim like that in the Synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and even in John's Gospel, 2 chapters later, you have the Jewish leaders come to Jesus, the same city in which he said before Abraham was, I am, and said it to Jews as well, and so they would have known that Jesus said this because the Jews had picked up stones to stone him. So the Jewish leaders would have known this. And they said, if you are the Messiah, tell us plainly. Well, wait a minute. If you're claiming to be Yahweh before Abraham was, I am, and they're not going to be saying, well, if you're the Messiah, tell us plainly.
They said, you're not even 50 years old.
Yeah.
So once again, the data could be there and interpretation could be different.
I just think, but look, I do think Jesus claimed divinity for himself. And the reason I think this is because not only do we have some different claims like this in the Synoptics, like Jesus claiming to be the apocalyptic Son of Man of Daniel 7, who's going to be worshipped and served. But the earliest Christian leaders seemed, they certainly believed Jesus was God. Look at the kenosis hymn in Philippians chapter 2. We could give a lot of stuff. What on earth or in heaven, Romans 10:9 and 13, what on earth or in heaven would have led them to this view, these pious monotheistic Jews to arrive at this belief that Jesus was God's uniquely divine son? If God has divine DNA, Jesus shares in it. What would have led them to believe this if Jesus himself had not made such claims?
Let me jump in at that point. Okay, John 8. I'd rather take the later one that you just brought up and do this. I just told PhD students last week, my class, I just said this. When I do surveys, informal things, what are the best verses for the deity of Christ? And they'll almost always say John 8:58, Romans, and John 10:30, I and the Father are one. And they took up stones in that passage. I'll say, look, whatever you do with 8 and 10, I don't think they're anywhere near the best verses. I would say the best texts are some of these. Matthew 11:27, the Johannine thunderbolt, or what's Witherington call it? The
meteorite.
Johannine lightning strike. Meteorite.
Yeah.
Mark 13:32.
Yep.
I'm the Son of God, and he says he's Son of the Father in that context. But he says, I don't know when I'm coming back.
No one knows the time of my coming. Not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father.
To which a lot of theologians said, for crying out loud, if you're going to say the Son of the Father, say you're the Son of the Father, but don't say I'm the Son of the Father, I don't know when I'm coming back.
Yep.
But it's there. I think the key, Abba is worth talking about, and Mark.
Maranatha.
Now that's early church. Well, if you put that Aramaic and say it's in Jesus' mouth, that's another one. I think the best text is by far not John 8, not John 10. I think it's Mark 14:61-62. Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?
That's a pretty decent one.
And he says, ego eimi. I don't think, first of all, that's Greek. Jesus probably didn't say it in Greek almost for sure. But I don't think that's the I am of Exodus 3. Just settled that. But he affirms it, yes. Secondly, he says, Son of Man. If the high priest wanted to jump in, he could say, whoa, whoa, whoa. According to the book of Psalms, you're the Son of Man. I'm the Son of Man. I ask you if he's Son of God. No, when Jesus said he's the Son of Man, he starts getting upset. He says, coming on the clouds, seated at the right hand of God, where Son of Man. Now, I know Baucham's recent Volume 1. He makes some really good points. But the Son of Man in 4th Ezra and
hold on a second. We're just getting... We're probably going into this more than we
Okay,
need
I'll
to.
end by saying, I'll say the best text is Mark 14:61 to 64, because when he said seated on the right hand of God, he crossed the line.
Go to my YouTube channel, type in, I think it's Did Jesus Claim to be Divine or something like that. I've got a whole lecture on it. I also had a debate several years ago with Dale Martin, who died, I think, last year.
Yale.
Yeah. We had two debates. I liked Dale. We had a good time together. We maintained our friendship to the end. Anyway, we had a debate on did Jesus believe he was divine or claim to be divine. You can see that there. All right. George Manat Jr., keep pushing on the definition, please, from an engineer. Not sure what you mean, George. Please clarify.
Definitions of what?
Maybe he means the definition of a minimal fact. All right, Life and Beyond. Hi, Mike. Got your book, Jesus Interrupted. Might you be willing to have a dialogue with apologists for maximal evidence for the resurrection, like Lydia McGrew or Jonathan McClatchy? Life and Beyond. Thank you for that book. I hope you enjoyed it. I just don't. I read a paper at ETS a few years ago. Gary read a paper there too. So did Bob Stewart and Rob Bowman. This discussion on minimal versus maximal facts, it just doesn't interest me. To me, it is pettifogging. Some others like Gary, he might want to do on it. I did a paper on it. Gary and I have done one or two responses to some of the things. I'm just not interested in pursuing that.
I'll add that in volume 1, and this was written before that debate got going. But in volume 1, there's 600 pages on the minimal facts. To show we're open and we think different strokes for different folks, there are different ways to get there. I've got almost 200 pages. It was 200 manuscript pages on Matthew 28, Mark 16, Luke 24, John 20, 21, first 11 verses of Acts 1. I do a reliability argument. I think I would be lying if I didn't say minimal facts argument stronger, but I did try to say there's more ways to get there than one. And it wasn't 10 pages or 20 or 30. It was 200 manuscript pages on the reliability and on the text behind the Gospels. I think every one of the Gospels, you have critics. And if anybody wants to question this, go for it. But behind every Gospel, there are some critics, one or more, who will say there's more than one or more sources behind each of the Gospels.
We don't need to get in all the evidence for that, though.
But but what I'm saying is we both think there's good data for the reliability argument, too.
Yeah. All right. There's a lot more of these. We keep getting comments, so we got to fly through these more if we're going to get to them. Really like to, and I see there's super chats, and I definitely want to get to those. So hang in there. What is the single best proof of the resurrection if we had to choose only one? 30 seconds.
I'm going to have a tie.
30 seconds.
And I say this in lectures. I'll have to take a tie between the early creeds, the data for the earliest creeds. They got to be before 1 Thessalonians, because Paul starts with heavy Christology. I'd say a lot of people say they're in the 30s. And secondly, Paul went to Jerusalem after his conversion 3 years later. So it's 35 to 36. He interviews the eyewitnesses, Peter and James, and in Galatians 2 he goes back and they ask about the data for the gospel. So he's on board, and he's got Peter and James, and John is there in chapter 2. I think their eyewitness testimony is excellent.
All right, resurrection nerd. Given the verb ophthe in 1 Corinthians 15, ophthe for he was seen or he appeared, didn't necessarily indicate the physical appearance of a person. Do you agree the earliest resurrection source is ambiguous in regards to the nature of the appearances? I did many word study. I do have pages on it. My large book, The Resurrection of Jesus, where I deal with the Greek there. And ophthe, you're right. It can mean a physical appearance, or it doesn't necessarily have to mean that. So that word in itself, in my opinion, now there are others like Ben Witherington, and maybe even Gary disagrees with me on this, but the creed in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 through 7, and then Paul adding verse 8, I don't think that requires bodily resurrection, that creed. That said, I do think that Paul's view of resurrection was bodily, physical resurrection, and I argue that elsewhere. In fact, there's the nature, Paul's view on resurrection. There's a short video in my YouTube channel about that, a short one. You can look at that. But I'd say Paul definitely believed in the bodily resurrection of Jesus. Bart Ehrman even acknowledges that. But I don't think that is the case in the Creed in 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8. I think ophthe is ambiguous there, or vague, sufficiently vague.
I'd say ophthe is used more often of physical sight than it is of non-physical sight. So if you're going to go with, that doesn't do it. But if you're just don't say it the other way around and say it almost always represents a ghost. It does not. That's not what the word means.
Okay. Bran of Raisin. How does Dr. Habermas define inerrancy, and is it drastically different than Dr. Licona's? So my definition is the Bible's inerrant in all that it teaches, or it's inerrant in its message.
I have no problem with the Chicago Statement. We disagree on this, but I have no problem with the Chicago Statement because of the interpretation of Article 13. No. I told my students last week, PhD students, I cannot subscribe to inerrancy without Article 13. Article 13 says there's all kinds of things that are not inerrancy, and then at the end it has a wrap-up statement, and it calls it the language of approximation. That's a quote from what they call inerrancy. So I think there's a lot more room than we normally say there is, but I don't have any problem with that statement.
Yeah. In terms of that, it's like, I know that some of the framers, like J.I. Packer had a different view, a way of interpreting the Chicago Statement than, say, Norman Geisler had. So
there's differences. It's a big group.
So some things that Geisler would not, like Geisler did not allow theistic evolution. He said if someone believed in theistic evolution, they denied inerrancy. Packer would say, no. We asked him, Paul Copan and I asked him personally. He did not think that. He thought someone could believe in theistic evolution and believe in inerrancy. I agree. The Article 13 in the Chicago Statement does allow a lot. I don't like the Chicago Statement because I think it's based on a faulty view of inspiration. And as I argued at ETS last year, an incorrect view of inspiration begets an incorrect view of inerrancy. So you and I would just disagree on some of this. I would have a more flexible view of inerrancy than you would, I would suppose. Would you say that's fair?
That's probably fair.
Okay.
We put that down as a topic to discuss this week, and I just got here, so we haven't gotten there yet.
That's true. They arrived Friday. They'll be leaving this Friday. All right. This is Matthew R. Some scholars, such as Tabor and Allison, believe the resurrection was not a bodily resurrection. Do you think it matters bodily or not? Allison does believe bodily resurrection.
Allison believes bodily. Dom Crossan has one book and one article in Neo Testamentica saying that, I heard him say, I've been there for all three dialogues. He dialogued with...
Let's try to answer this in 30 seconds.
He answers, he had a dialogue with Tom Wright. And I heard him say all three times, my view is very similar to Tom's. I don't hold that Jesus appeared bodily, but I think the New Testament scholars think Jesus appeared bodily.
All right. Do you think it matters whether one believes it's bodily or not?
I think it's the New Testament view, so the question is, what do you want to do with Paul and the views of others? Well, go ahead.
Okay.
I've got another guy who just wrote about this, a skeptic, but go ahead.
I don't know how to pronounce this one. Anyway, at Resurrection Nerd, do you think Paul himself interpreted the 1 Corinthians 15 Creed as referring to a bodily resurrection? I do, because I do think that Paul believed in the bodily resurrection of Jesus. So when he said bodily, or when he said resurrection, I think he meant bodily.
Remember Tom Wright's multi-hundred pages saying, he maybe takes it too far, but he says the words agnostasis and agero almost always, pagans, Jews, and Christians, mean something happened to the body. It means to stand up again. It means what went down is what came out. Mm-hmm. You don't have to think you believe in that, but I think you have to say they thought it was that.
Okay. Resurrection Nerd. I'm not referring to the type of resurrection. I'm talking about the nature of the appearances, how they confirm Jesus was risen again.
Yeah. If you believe they're bodily, I'll be criticized for saying this because I'm not going to release a name. But a friend of mine was just sent an email. I have a copy of the email. I have the guy's name on it. Doesn't prove it. But one of the top skeptics around said in his estimation, over 80% of contemporary scholars believe that the New Testament view is bodily resurrection, that they thought that. Okay. The person writing it did not believe it, but they said that was Paul's view and others.
Christian Gadfly. This is awesome. I wish I could watch this, but I have to Anyway, yeah, hey, check into it another time. All right, let's see. Humbled clay. Question. Some people believe Jesus, that's the same thing with sprinkled. All right. You all look great. Thanks. Paul Agia, thank you for steel manning me, Mike. I've got to go, but we'll send a few super chat questions that I will listen to answer later. Ignore it if too many. All right, thanks, Paul Agia. I hope you're doing well. All right, humbled clay again. Sprinkled at his baptism, fulfilling all the requirements for the priesthood. Do you think that John the Baptist baptized Jesus by sprinkling him?
All I can tell you,
It said he came up out of the water.
he went into the water confessing their sins, was John's baptism, not Jesus. Jesus didn't sin. But in John, when he baptized people, they entered the water confessing their sins. The primary meaning of baptizo, the first definition, it can be different, but the first definition is to immerse.
Yep.
And in the early churches in North Africa, for example, they have baptismal tanks with steps going down in them. Just like, that didn't prove anything except that it's a carryover from the earliest view, I think.
Yeah.
You can believe otherwise, but you have to do with what the script, what the words say.
Yeah, and it's interesting. In Didache, it talks about how, if
Yeah.
the preferred way of doing it would be through living water, right?
Every water that's running.
Well, that is living water.
Oh, okay,
So it'd
if
be
it's
like
moving.
a river or the Mediterranean Sea, Aegean Sea, or something like that, and
Or-
cold, if possible.
Or still, but it's still got to be for outdoors and whatever.
Yep. And then if you couldn't get that, then you could pour.
He's got a
So
list
I think
of
it's
them.
kind of funny. Today you've got heated baptistries.
He goes all the way down. I think he might even allow like sprinkling, but he says if you have to do it this way, for crying out loud. Yeah, he's got this line of how to do it.
Yeah.
In the Didache.
Now, I'm looking at Mark chapter 1, verse 10. It says, immediately coming up out of the water. So it seems like they're talking about being immersed
And
there.
it says also going down into the water, they confess their sins. John's candidates early before Jesus came.
Okay. All right, let's see. Jeff Lesueur, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Is there any minimal facts argument supporting the consecrated by the Holy Spirit virgin birth? Are there any minimal facts argument supporting the consecrated by the Holy Spirit virgin birth? Well, let me just ask you this. Virgin birth is not a minimal fact.
It's not in the minimal facts. Now, if the point is, in some creeds, the minimal fact shows he's Son of God. We already made comments. You can get there many other ways, Mark 14 and other passages. So, but I cannot claim that there's anything over the virgin birth in any of the minimal facts.
Best books on the reliability of the New Testament. Ben Shaw, our friend, just came out with one. What would you say? Is that entry, intermediate, or advanced?
Ben's? I'd say it's
Would that
more
be a first book to pick up?
It's a good first book to pick up. It'll stretch you a little bit, but it's better to first, maybe intermediate.
Okay.
And Ben would say that he does it for lay people.
Yep.
And you know what? Mike's not speaking up for himself, but Mike's got a great big resurrection book arguing the minimal facts. And his last two major books do reliability arguments.
Well, no, they don't do reliability.
No, but you're arguing for other data. It doesn't depend on minimal facts. There's other data like Gospels.
I'm talking about, I do think that both books show that if you're going to use contradictions to undermine the matter of the reliability of Scripture, you can't do it. It doesn't work. That's what I think.
It doesn't disallow the data.
No, right. So you still have to build. My last two books on gospel differences doesn't build a positive case for reliability, but it does address one of the major objections to reliability. Now, I do have an article.
Way to say it.
I do have an article that's not an intermediate, be more of an advanced argument for reliability, and that's something I'm trying to work on in terms of the foundation. What do we mean by reliability when it comes to
But it's just interesting that you and Ben, Ben did his MA thesis, PhD, and he's doing this reliability for sure.
Yeah.
You're defending Gospels on other grounds, and you got this book on reliability.
How do you think Ben's book compares to, let's say, Peter Williams' book on reliability?
They're both published by the same company too.
Okay.
I think Ben has more variety. He has over a dozen arguments. He probably doesn't get
Pete's
into the
book is good.
Each book is good. Ben doesn't get into the manuscript as much. He's an historian. His PhD is in philosophy of history.
So you're saying they kind of have different. So Peter Williams' book on reliability, Ben Shaw's book just called Reliability. And I think
Craig Blomberg.
yeah, that's the one. I mean, I think for an advanced,
His big one, the
intermediate to
850-page
advanced
book.
Yeah, are the Gospels historically, or no, it's called The Historical Reliability of the Gospels. That's an excellent
He's got
book.
the one on John, too.
Yes. And Jesus the Purifier, that just came out, and that's on John and some reliability. But yeah, he's got the historical reliability of John's Gospel. Excellent book. All right, let's see. Julie Scaving, my friend and dear sister, this is both fun and education, even for a less than bright follower. Thank you for sharing your interaction. She's one of the godliest women I know. And thank you for your example, Julie, and how to maintain a godly attitude in the midst of suffering. You are an inspiration. Humbled Clay, and thank you both for doing this. Love you both. Hey, make this a habit. Okay, thanks, Humbled Clay. We'll try to remember and do this every year when he comes. Do it yourself craft Q super sticker. Hey, thank you for doing that. Appreciate it. Hippo character with stars growing in his eyes. Maybe you mean glowing. Pumping his arms in the air with the word hype pulsating above him. Not sure what that means, but thank you. All right, let's see. Question. Besides you two greats, who are some of the most respected resurrection scholars, apologists in your view? Resurrection scholars. Well, you got to say Tom Wright and Dale Allison for resurrection scholars.
Sure.
But they're not claiming to be apologists and out there.
I would have to say they both are. You've got a great book on it. There's other people who are doing it. We had a
Ben
book.
Shaw. I mean, Ben. He's up and coming, but he probably knows resurrection. I mean, you know it better than anyone. I feel like I know it pretty well.
You do.
Ben, I think he's probably close to where I am.
He's very active. Don't mess with him. He's, black belt in jiu-jitsu. That goes along with the.
But he knows his stuff, right?
That's resurrection.
So,
jiu-jitsu.
any other main?
Sure. I think there's people. Mike and I did a book.
What do you think of Andrew Luck?
We did the case for the resurrection with almost 100 pages on naturalistic theories. Now, my big ones on that.
We're talking about others here.
Others besides us.
Yeah. So
almost most books on reliability, Barrett.
No, we're talking
Barnett.
about resurrection.
Right. Barnett has a number of stuff on the early creeds and how it points to the deity and resurrection of Christ.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff out there.
So, of course, William Lane Craig. And his book that was with, The Sun Rises, but then his academic book,
Too.
Assessing the New Testament Evidence for the Resurrection of Jesus, published by Mellon Press. Well, that is coming out, if it's not already, with Stock, and that is an excellent book. So that's one definitely worth getting.
50 pages on the early creed in 1 Corinthians 15.
Got some really good stuff. All right, let's see. Humbled Clay on a 32-inch screen. It's like y'all are sitting in my living room. Love it. Glad to hear that, Humbled Clay. All right, let's see. Here's Jeff again. There are Aramaic scholars that claim they have the most reliable Bible called the Peshitta. Have you heard of or researched this?
It's not my area.
That's not my area either, but the most reliable Bible, really, let's face it, the New Testament was all written in Greek. There's some questions about Matthew, maybe in Hebrew or Aramaic at first, but that's probably not the Matthew that we have today. So that sounds to me like it's going down the wrong path.
You're a New Testament guy.
Yeah, let's see. Do it yourself craft Q. Do you know the work of Dr. Grocott, the chemist? I love his view of young Earth. Do you believe in young Earth?
We're both looking at each other.
I'll just say, look, it's not my lane. I lean toward old Earth. Okay, I just do. But this is not my lane, and for me, it doesn't matter.
It's not mine. I'll tell you what. I just moderated a debate between Hugh Ross and Marcus Ross, a young earther and an old earther. So I think it should be discussed. I think it's a 4 or 5 views question.
All right, Carlos, do you think Mark 6:50, specifically where it says, "Take courage, it is I," can be considered a divine claim, since the Greek technically says, "I am"? What do you think?
Which text?
This is Mark chapter 6, verse 50. I think that's where Jesus is walking on water, which if
I thought he said 16.
6. No, he
said
said
six.
650.
Okay, sorry.
They saw him and were terrified. Okay, now, all right, this is a good question. So, here's what this is interesting, Carlos. So you got Jesus. He sends his disciples. This is after feeding the 5,000. They are crossing the Sea of Galilee, and a storm comes up. So now they're kind of frightened, and they see Jesus coming, walking on water. Now this is really interesting. It says, he came to them walking on the sea, and he intended to pass by them. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed that it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But he immediately spoke to them and said to them, take courage, ego me, it is I, do not be afraid. I know some people like to say that ego me, it is the I am there, but Jesus says that elsewhere, and I think some of the disciples on some occasions use the ego me. So just because they say that doesn't mean they're making a claim to divine claim there. That said, I think it's really interesting. Richard Hayes, in his book about, I think it's echoes in the New Testament, something like that, he mentions this text. And of course, the Old Testament says that it is God who walks on water. And so here you've got Mark having Jesus walking on water, and then it says, and I think it's in Isaiah where it says God is walking on water. And in Isaiah, when it says it, it's just a few verses later, it says, and he intended to pass, or God passes by them. And it's like, I think, and Hayes says that Mark has this text in mind. So he's trying to call attention to this. And so as an allusion to the Old Testament text in Isaiah, that by Jesus walking on water, he's trying to signify this is a divine claim. And, you know, we got to come back to this thing about deity of Jesus. One of the arguments, I think, when you see the Gospels as ancient biography is, as Plutarch says, you're trying to illuminate who the character of this person is through their words and deeds. And so it starts off, you know, as Isaiah the prophet said, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight his paths. And here you're thinking it's Jesus preparing the way for God, but no, it's John the Baptist preparing the way for Jesus. Mark is taking a text that refers to God and he's applying that to Jesus. Well, from the very beginning there, he's suggesting Jesus is God. Chapter 2, Jesus
Forgive sin.
Yeah, he forgives sins, which the Jewish leaders say
blasphemy.
It's blasphemy. Only God can do that. Chapter 3, I think this is where he expels some demons, and they talk about expelling demons, and Jesus gives that thing. Or they say it's Satan casting out Satan. And Jesus said, well, that's, no, it's like a strong man. If you want to rob him, you got to bind him. Then you can plunder his house of goods. Well, Jesus saying his exorcisms is he's binding Satan and is now plundering his kingdom of goods, of souls. So that's like 3. And then he walks on water. He stills the storm. He raises the dead. All these things that God does. And walking on water here, he intended to pass them by. Well, that's kind of really strange. Why would he pass them by? But if you take it in light of Isaiah, God passes them by. Mark is trying to say here through Jesus' deeds that he is God. And so that's what I think is going on there. I don't think we need the I am. At most, that's ambiguous. It's ambiguous of whether he's meaning God there. But I do think through him saying Jesus walking on water intending to pass them by, he's saying that Jesus is God. Jesus is God's uniquely divine son. Connor, thank you for the super chat. He says, you all often say that if Jesus rose, then that is it, and Christianity is true. But what of Baha'i and some Buddhists that also affirm resurrection?
I'd have to hear details in that. Every once in a while, you hear some sect. J.N.D. Anderson gives an example of some of Hindus, not on resurrection, but on similar things. I think we'd have to know a little more details about what the sect teaches and what they're doing. It's hard to respond in a vacuum to us, especially if it's a small group.
Okay. Hey, Jeff, thanks for the super chat. Appreciate it, brother. All right, here's another one. This is from, I can't read. I guess it's Portuguese. The Jesus family scandal of him, of call him crazy in Mark. That's Mark chapter 3 at the end,
3,
right?
6, and John 7.
Okay. Jesus family scandal of call him crazy in Mark shows that the birth narratives in Matthew and Luke can't be truth. I think this is a decent question. I've wondered this myself. All right, so if Jesus was born of a virgin, why is it that none of his brothers believed in him? Why did they think he was beside himself? Certainly they would have heard this. But, I had a skeptic ask me once over lunch. We're eating lunch, and he said, do you ever have questions about anything? I said, yeah. And I told him that. I said, I don't understand how that could be. He says, that doesn't bother me a bit. I said, really? He said, no. If I had a sinless brother who had been born of a virgin, I'd hate him. So I guess we all have just different things there.
And they weren't around anyway.
That's true at the time. But, what's interesting, Ignatius, in his letter to the Magnesians, I think it is, chapters 1 and 2, he says, the virgin birth truly occurred. The resurrection truly occurred. I think the resurrection's chapter 2, the virgin birth chapter 1. So, here you got a bishop in the early church who knew Polycarp, who was a disciple probably of the Apostle John, and he believed virgin birth as something that really happened. If they meant it just as a literary thing, someone so close to the apostles, I don't know, it seems more plausible to say that they really believed it.
Yeah, I think there's something to be gained from close to the apostles, but it's not in the middle of facts. So yeah. I'm saying I would go if I'm going to try to do it evidentially, I'm going to try to make tighter arguments.
Okay. Let's see. Hello, Mike. Blessings. Greetings to Dr. Habermas. I am Yairo Mendoza. Hey, thanks for the greetings. Appreciate it. For me, here's another one. I think this is from the Portuguese. For me, they would never say that if the birth narratives were truth. Well, I think it's an interesting thing here. It's something, we've not really studied the virgin birth historically. So,
folks, just a passing comment, a little off the subject, but right on this point. Most doubt, according to psychology, is emotional. People can say anything emotionally, no matter what the data say. So I don't think personally you can argue from they're really ticked off about this, so therefore they didn't believe that. No, they can hear things that can make them angry, and the going off. It kind of what you said about they would hate them, emotional places are caused in our hearts by not being able to go along with certain reports. It's very common in psychological literature.
All right, Resurrection Nerd, follow up to that. Without reading the Gospels and Acts into the text, how do you know 1 Corinthians was referring to appearances before the ascension versus all occurring afterwards?
Well, it's funny. Mike and I were talking about this last night. And I'm going to be real clear. People think we don't go on a limb and say things. We don't have criteria to date the creeds. Now, Jimmy Dunn seems to say that the early 1 Corinthians 15 creed could have come within a year, could come in the first year. Other people say that it could have come from the first year. A number of scholars put the creeds in the 30s AD. But I don't think we can get up there.
Ludeman and Robert Funk said within 2 to 3 years, right?
2 to 3. And Ludeman said the preaching of resurrection happened immediately, his word, immediately afterwards. Now, he believed in hallucination, so again, he disagrees on the interpretation, but he believed the preaching happened immediately. I think there's a good evidence. Hey, listen, the Jesus Seminar thinks that 1 Corinthians 15 or its building blocks, one or the other, was in existence before Paul set out for Damascus. That's in their second volume on What Did Jesus Do?
It's interesting. I don't know how they get that. That'd be nice if that's the case.
But they voted it. So whatever it is, it's their vote.
But it's like, I think, look, if Paul wrote 1 Corinthians around 55 and he's saying, hey, I delivered to you what I also received, he's probably referring back to 51, and he received it before 51. So we can certainly say he probably received this thing no later, a terminus ad quem or ad quo, whatever it is, of the year 50. And he's getting it certainly from the apostles or someone certainly he deemed credible. So
I'm going to say
it goes back to the alleged eyewitnesses.
which is 35 to 36
Yeah.
of his trip to Jerusalem, which that's why I said it was tied for first place with the creeds.
Yeah. All right. So let's see what Joe Powers. So the Gospel of John seems to imply that there was some dispute about Jesus being a bastard son among the Jews and opponents. I've heard you guys say that Luke used Mary for his infancy story. You haven't heard me say it, or if I said it, I have. I don't remember saying that.
I know I've never said it because that's not my material.
Yeah,
I don't write about that.
I'm not going to say yes or no. I don't know. I mean, he may have. He's seeking out eyewitnesses and those who knew the eyewitnesses, so maybe he did, but I don't know that we can know that. Connor, y'all should do this more often than you could afford to spend a long time on some questions. P.S. Thanks for your work, and may well not have become Christian without y'all work. Well, thank you, Connor. Great to hear that. Apologetics 101. Hello, everyone. Hello, Apologetics 101. All right, Joe Powers. And also, Matthew had infancy narratives. What is the consensus on Luke, Matthew having actual sources for this? This is in reply to the man above saying if Jesus was crazy, etc. in Mark's gospel.
I started this broadcast really, really early saying I think there are texts behind every one of the likely, fairly likely, more likely degrees of plausibility behind every single gospel, like the passion narrative, pre-passion narrative in Mark, which Rudolf Bultmann admitted at least in part. I think there's reason there could be a miracle source behind John. Very common. The Jesus Seminar, they rejected it, but they considered it strongly, a miracle source behind the fourth gospel. Luke says he interviewed eyewitnesses. What do you do with the fact that there's Q? Verses in Matthew and Luke, not in Mark. That's a source. What about M, the source that Matthew had alone? Luke, L. There are at least 5 major gospel sources. M, L, Q, John. So there are early... And
Mark, Q, M, L, John.
John. And the conclusion is that the overall genre of the New Testament is Greco-Roman bios. I think that...
Of the Gospels.
Of the Gospels. What did I say?
New Testament.
Oh, sorry. Gospels. And you put those together and it has the marks of... Look, Greco-Roman writers made all kinds of misstatements. We don't have to agree with everything.
Yeah, but they also put some fiction in there too. I mean, you could blend various genres.
But it shows that it was serious, and they had sources before. Maurice Casey, and James Crossley, put the Gospel of Mark about 38 A.D. and Casey dates Matthew. Well, he's deceased now, but he dates Matthew about 50 A.D. So there are skeptics, or both agnostics. They date the material early because there are signs like this.
Okay, Michael Beverly. Let's ask the serious question. Will the Braves make the playoffs, Mike? Hey, Gary, are you also a baseball fan? Hey, thanks, Michael. I hope the Braves make the playoffs, but they've had a tough year. They were expected to have a better team this year than they did when they won the World Series in 2021, but they have been plagued by injuries. And so it depends how they... I guess it just depends how they do with. Let me look at the schedule here.
This is the last couple of days, right?
Yeah. Let's see. They play tomorrow, so they play today, and they lost today. So now it looks like they are tied with the Mets for the. Oh no, they're still ahead. I guess they've done better against the Mets than the Mets have done. So right now they're in it. It's just a matter of who wins tomorrow. So if the Mets win tomorrow, then the Mets go to the playoffs and the Braves get kicked out. If the Braves win tomorrow, well, then the Braves will go to the playoffs.
You folks wonder about how early we think the creeds are, but Mike scrambled and found the playoff results faster than he found the creed. So that tells you where his heart is.
Whoa. Well, that's interesting.
Uh-oh.
Oh, so there's a season-ending doubleheader tomorrow. That is going to determine who goes to the playoffs. On the last day of the season. So it's been a tough season for them. Thanks for asking. Gary, are you a baseball fan?
Barely. I like the Tigers, but there's not enough body contact. I like hockey and football. If you played golf like Happy Gilmore, I might even look at golf. But right now, no, hockey and football.
Okay, Apologetics 101. Mike Licona, question. How would you defend the group appearances? Well, I would say, number one, the group appearances are mentioned in our earliest source, the oral tradition, the Creed in 1 Corinthians 15.
And that's not the only one.
Which would really go back to, well, for the group appearances?
We have the Acts sermon summaries.
Acts sermon
chapter
summaries?
10,
Yep.
Acts chapter 2.
And most scholars do think that those, even though that those aren't transcripts of necessarily what was said on those, that they do encapsulate the kerygma, the early and official apostolic proclamation.
If I could stick in there with C.H. Dodd, who's maybe the top scholar on the Acts sermon summaries, he said, I'm not saying the exact words of Peter, but they came from that time. The apostles were around. They had their testimony. They had to have been working together there somewhere.
Yeah. And then I would also appeal to, I'd say, look, I think we've got some decent evidence for the traditional authorship of the Gospels, at least for some of the Gospels. At minimum, Mark and Luke and John.
Tell them about some of the majority things.
Yeah, so I had a student, Joshua Pelletier. I supervised his master's thesis, and he looked at, it's not published because he's doing his PhD research now, and he's adding French and German to it, and plus expanding. But he looked at over 200 critical scholars writing in English since 1965 to see where they stood on it. Not everybody commented on it. They might say, well, this is what the majority say, but they're not telling their own opinion.
Sure.
So we just put them in a different category. So if you're looking at those who are actually commenting and say, I believe Mark, got his information from Peter, or I don't believe Mark got his information from Peter, or he possibly, or probably did not. A slight majority of critical scholars who actually opine on whether they believe it and give reasons, a slight majority of critical scholars think that the traditional authorship of Mark is correct and that Mark's primary source is Peter. I haven't done it with John. Oh, by the way, with Luke, I had another student. He's not following up with a PhD at this point. His name's Matt Hill, very sharp guy, and he did his master's thesis. I supervised it on Luke Acts, and he did over right at 200 critical scholars writing in English. He only did English since 1965. And yes, by far, the majority of critical New Testament scholars go with the traditional authorship of Luke Acts.
And that goes for the reliability thing that we mentioned earlier. That counts for the authorship and for Greco-Roman bios and for some of the other things. The Gospels can't be ignored. I'm not talking about you. You don't ignore them. But they have to be counted in all these questions.
And then when it comes to John's Gospel, I haven't done any research on that. Craig Keener, I've talked to Blomberg, and also Paul Anderson. It seems like a majority of critical scholars today, Johannine specialists, they don't take the traditional authorship of John seriously, but they do think that either a minor disciple of Jesus wrote John's Gospel or was the primary source behind that
Like Richard Bauckham.
Yeah. So you still have, Richard Bauckham. So you still have Mark, Luke, and John are closely rooted in eyewitness testimony, and you've got the group appearances implied in Mark's Gospel, and you have them narrated in Matthew, Luke, and John. So
let me add one thing. You asked earlier.
You've got that in addition to the Acts source sermon summaries
2 and 10.
the Creed in 1 Corinthians 15. So it's early and multiple independent sources.
You asked earlier, I could give a lot more if given more time here on skeptics who allow the group appearances no matter what their view is of them. One more to add is Helmut Kirster, who says the closer we... Oh, and Norman Perrin, who said... The closer we get to the appearances, both of them said, the better the appearances go, and both of them said we have appearances to the disciples, and they usually throw in Mary and the women, and so does the Jesus Seminar. Whatever you do with it, they said don't leave out Mary and the women. So there are a number of more than that we have time to set here about skeptics of varying degrees who allow that.
Anyone know how to spell Ben's last name? Ben Shaw. How do you spell Ben's last name?
S-H-A-W.
Yeah. Ben's a great guy. Check out his book, Reliable. Mike, what is your response to Lydia McGrew? Okay, I have, and this is from Faith and Reason. I have 8 videos that I did called either Lydia McGrew Answered or Answering Lydia McGrew. Just go to my YouTube channel, and it's in one of the, it's in, there's a playlist for it. So I've done that. If you want some of the document, in every one of those videos, in the description part of that, you can download the PDF file, which is a transcript, and it's got footnotes that document the things that I say. Also, there are some of the more recent videos that I have done, like with Tim Stratton and Josh Klein, as well as some others where I answer some of the things of the pushback by the McGrews and Jonathan McClatchy and some others where I address those in there. So, all right. Life and Beyond. Do you consider John 8:58 before Abraham was, I am as pink or black? Would you say that I am as Yahweh? Would you take I am as Yahweh? I guess that's for me. I would say it's either pink or gray. Gray meaning that Jesus communicated the idea, but not those words. I'd probably put it as gray. And yes, I would take the I am in that context as Yahweh.
And I wouldn't. So
before Abraham was I am, you wouldn't take him as referring to Yahweh?
To me, it's stronger in Mark 14, ego me.
Yeah, but do you think it's...
I know, but what I'm saying is I don't think it's in Mark 14. I think Mark 14 is even stronger.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Do you agree that the name Jesus for a messianic candidate, it's not something... Do you agree that the name Jesus for a messianic candidate, it's not something embarrassing for something that was not made up?
Jesus or Messiah?
Yeah. Well,
Jesus is a human name.
Yeah, Jesus.
It's the New Testament version of Joshua.
Joshua, yeah. Which Joshua, doesn't that mean Savior?
Not sure, but Matthew 1:21, he'll save his people from their sins after the name Jesus is given.
Yeah.
But even Messiah, by the way, you anointed. Messiah means anointed one. Prophets, priests, and kings were anointed. Even the Jewish writings say nothing about Messiah has to imply deity. I think Son of Man, Son of God, and the application of Yahweh to Paul's writings are much stronger arguments.
Okay. Resurrection Nerd, thanks for answering the questions. Without reading the Gospels and Acts into the text, how do you know the appearances to the other disciples were different than Paul's own experience in 1 Corinthians 15? I think that's kind of like unfairly tying hands behind the back, because if the Gospels and Acts were written by either eyewitnesses or those who knew the eyewitnesses, why not include them?
I'm going to go, and you've got this in your own material. Yes, bring the Gospels in. But today, the predominant view among critical scholars, and critical scholars, you can line up the views who say this, Paul believed in bodily appearances. Paul believed in bodily appearances. So if Tom Wright's argument, anastasis, agero, are bodily events. I would say Paul alone is enough for bodily. You want to throw the Gospels in, it gets stronger, not weaker.
And it seems like from the Creed in 1 Corinthians 15, especially given Galatians chapters 1 and 2 especially, he's preaching the same gospel they're preaching. They certified that he's on message with the gospel, with what they're preaching.
Yeah, I didn't say this, but he goes to Jerusalem at +5 or 6. We said that. But in 1 Corinthians 15:11, right after the Creed, Paul says, so we preach and so you believe. Twice now, once from Paul, once from them to Paul. The message of the eyewitnesses was the same as the message of Paul, and almost no critic will deny that Paul was an eyewitness.
Okay, so you got George Manat here, Jr., definition of majority. I really wish that you had a better definition for this, to be honest with you.
That's wonderful, but I never defined it, and I did it on purpose because, let's just put it this way. If I defined it, you know what's going to happen? If I said 85, someone's going to say, I found 3 of your people and they were 84. I mean, I just think that discussion goes nowhere. But I will tell you, whether I made a mistake or I didn't make a mistake. We don't put percentages on it, and I have not done that. We got called down in that dialogue with Bowman and Stewart, and they thought Bob's a great friend, but he thought I said 90. I've not said anything in print. People might get that idea, but I don't say it.
When we did the case for the resurrection of Jesus, we said James was about 90%, I think. The other appearances, like to the apostles, was close to 100%. Paul, close to 100%.
And I think
we
you
said
said
empty
I think
tomb
you
was
said
around
that.
75.
Now that I counted. Remember, I counted empty tomb and I updated it in the first volume. I'll go on empty tomb, but it's not on minimal facts. I think you read wrote those other percentages in the co-author book.
I will say this. I haven't studied it like Gary has. Okay, but I've looked at enough sources.
He's very good.
And I tell you, a significant majority, a very strong majority,
Yes.
I haven't done the bean counting, but a very strong majority would agree on these minimal facts.
They would.
Okay.
They would. That's fair.
All right. USA Soldier for Christ. Hey, thanks for serving. I loved Volume 1 of your magnum opus, Dr. Habermas.
Thank you.
I recently received Volume 2 in the mail, and I'm looking forward to reading it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. You must have gotten it right there at the beginning. It's been out for less than a week. Actually, today is 1 week. Today's the 7th day it was sent out.
Awesome. All right. Shiro, Super Chat. Hey, thanks, Shiro. Appreciate it. For both, here's the question. Have you guys convinced any scholar of the truth of the resurrection?
Scholars? Well, I'm going to say yes, but someone you can't pin. Someone just said it, but I'm not going to quote him. I'll quote him. I'll whisper it to you during break.
Well,
Yes.
For me, I'd say no, but I have college students, graduate students, even some atheists. In fact, if you go to my website, or not website, my YouTube channel, there's a gentleman, well, there's two of them. There was one guy up in, when I was in Canada a few times, and he said he was a Muslim, and he watched my debate with Shabir Ali,
Yes.
and then some other stuff, and he ended up becoming a Christian. And then there was a guy in Chicago who was a militant atheist who went online trying to get Christians to deconvert from their faith. And he watched my debate with Matt Dillahunty. Dillahunty was his hero. And he became convinced by my arguments that Christianity was true, that Jesus actually rose. And he became a Christian. And he says, now I use the arguments that you used in that debate in order to argue against other militant atheists.
I've got one on my website where a guy said I was a militant atheist. I did this for years. I became a believer because of the minimal facts. And there is, I wish I could give the view, but I can't. I'm not going to speak for somebody else. There is a well-known skeptic who just recently said this. And don't forget, Pinchas Lapid affirmed the resurrection of Jesus. He's Jewish, never converted. He thinks Jesus is the Messiah for the Gentiles, but he argues for the historicity of the resurrection.
Savior for the Gentiles.
Savior. And Vermesh is very close. It's hard to tell where Vermesh is, another Jewish scholar.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of things going around today.
All right, Apologetics 101. Dr. Habermas, are you taking interview requests? He wants to interview you.
This is an interview, folks. This is an interview request. Okay, I can't until I finish volume 4. I'm down here this week and everything's on hold because I'm with Mike and his wife, my wife and I. So I do a lot. I've got, 6 or 7 speaking engagements in a week. I try to do what I can, but I can't take any till the beginning of next year because my last volume is due in November, and that doesn't count the editing. That's just handing it in. So I'm doing my best to get volume 4 in. If I keep taking interviews, I'm not going to finish. And
So
it's going
contact you after when?
early next year,
Okay.
January or February. I've already got dozens calling me early next year.
There you go, Apologetics 101. Contact them after the first of the year. USA Soldier for Christ. I love Volume 1 of your magnum opus, Dr. Habermas.
Thank you.
I recently received, okay, we already said that one. Resurrection Nerd. Mike, do you believe the appearance to Paul was a vision like Acts 26:19 says? If so, does 1 Corinthians 15:8 mean Jesus appeared to Paul in a vision, and therefore visions were accepted as seeing Jesus? Okay, so that's good. That's a fair question. I do think the appearance to Paul was different than it was to the other apostles. we have to keep in mind that the appearance to Paul was after the ascension of Jesus.
After glorified. He was glorified.
So that's something. But Paul, now, was it a hallucination? Well, if you're going to take Acts on this and the description of it in Acts, take all of the details there. Don't just be selective. I'm not saying you're doing it, but what I would do is I'd also point to the fact that Paul's traveling companions saw the light. They fell to the ground as well, and they heard the voice. They just didn't understand what it said. So this was a group experience. So and group hallucinations, they don't happen. So
and if they do, they don't happen over and over and over. You'd have to get one for every group. We don't ever emphasize that.
They're extremely rare, if not impossible. Right.
And if they're extremely rare and you do one for every group appearance, you're in trouble.
All right. So let's see.
By the way, let me ask something real quickly. John Dominic Crossan wrote an article on this, I said it earlier, and a book on Acts. And he said, you won't believe this from Dom Crossan, but he said, we have secondary sources from Luke on Paul's appearance, primary sources from the Apostle Paul. Paul uses the words for Gnosticis. So Dom says, I got to go with bodily. He said, because I take Paul's primary eyewitness evidence over Luke's secondary evidence.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yes, I remember
and
Crossan
John
saying
Dominic
that.
Crossan who says that argument. You
Crossan
can look it up.
and his co-author.
The second one is Jonathan Reed.
Yeah, Jonathan Reed.
But he says it alone in the Neo Testament and New Testament article in South Africa.
I remember Jonathan Reed when, what was it? What was the guy who's called the naked archaeologist? Simcha Yakubovich.
Oh, who did the, whatever.
The Tapia tomb.
Yeah.
And the Tapia tomb. And when that came out, I remember Nightline. It was, I don't know if it was Nightline, but it was Ted Koppel.
Who's Jewish.
Yeah. And he had Jonathan Reed on there. And Jonathan Reed,
co-author of John.
And he's Jesus Seminar, has done stuff with Crossan. And he says, yeah, it's Koppel said, what do you think of it? He says, I think it's archaeoporn. You want to look at it, but you know it's wrong.
But that secondly, so we got to think about this. Luke is secondary, Paul is primary. Hard to deny that. Mm-hmm. And Dom says, whatever you do, I'm going with the primary data. And he decides that Paul saw Dom doesn't believe it, but he thinks Paul thinks he saw the resurrected body of Jesus.
All right, David VR, what aspects of the New Testament or the case for the resurrection are most commonly attacked by skeptics? To me, it seems that the authorship and dating of the Gospels are heavily attacked by skeptics. I mean, yeah, I'd say authorship of the Gospels and what's the other, dating? Yeah. I do think a lot of skeptics out there, they overplay and exaggerate. So, I mean, Bart Ehrman has said on occasion that almost all scholars think that Mark was written after 70. That is not true. It is not true. In fact, my student who did the thing on, the authorship of Mark also did the thing on the dating, and he found that by far, most scholars, by far, think it's between 65 and 70 that Mark was written. And if you want to go further, then it's 50 to 70. And only about 10% of critical scholars writing in English since 1965 think it's after 70. You have Robin Faith Walsh, who said a majority of scholars are saying that Luke Acts were written in the 2nd century, and that is simply false. I mean, it's demonstrably false.
That's any large number.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah.
But again, critics go to Paul, and Paul does it alone. If Paul establishes it, here's Dom Crossan, don't go to secondary data. I don't think it's secondary data. I think we've got to bring it up there. But Paul is the man, and he believed in bodily resurrection according to almost everybody.
All right, resurrection nerds. Since no description is given in 1 Corinthians 15, how do you know the group appearances weren't something like Virgin Mary sightings or believing he appeared to them from heaven and not a physical sighting?
Let me ask you a question. How come when someone tries to argue for group hallucinations, why are they almost always Mariology appearances? It's like, why not Krishnaology appearances? Buddha. Maybe it's because Buddha's sources are 600, 800 years after he was born. We don't have good data. I'm not going to say, by the way, all those people don't see Mary. They watch the children watch Mary. There's tens of thousands of people there. They don't see Mary.
They saw something.
Egypt's a little bit different, but you have
But
to
she
get in
doesn't
there.
identify himself. She never identifies herself in those. In the one in Egypt.
In the Egyptian ones.
Yeah.
So,
Where she appeared to these
but again,
groups.
I mean, what I'm saying is, I'm not Catholic, but am I glad we're talking about Mary and not Buddha? I mean, there is a quantitative difference here. That's not my view, and I don't think it stands up to criticism. I'm just saying, why do they always jump in and use Catholic examples, and then they go, yeah, but you Christians are crazy, but they just use the Catholic example to get themselves out of the hole.
Yeah.
It's just,
The thing is, look, I'm not a Catholic, so I'm inclined theologically not to think that it was Mary, but I'm open to it.
I didn't say it was.
I don't think it's hallucinations.
It isn't the Christian tradition. That's my point.
It could be a spirit being of some sort.
Could be what?
A spirit being of some sort,
Oh.
even if it's not married. So it's like we can. The nice thing about where we're at, we can be open to a number of different options here, whereas the atheists cannot. They have to look at hallucination, for the most part, a group hallucination,
And-
which seems very implausible.
I tell people this all the time. It's not a group hallucination will get you out of resurrection. The naturalistic theory is called group hallucination, group hallucination, group hallucination, group hallucination. Group. Every time there's a group appearance and you want to punt to group hallucination, now you start asking this: what's more likely, 10 group hallucinations, 8 group hallucinations, or 1 resurrection? I'll go, miracles can't happen. Let me throw something in as a philosopher. You can't prove naturalism's true. If you don't start with the truth of naturalism, how do you get this skepticism when there's no data that prove naturalism?
Okay, so now we got Roy Ray, and he says here, is there textual variant for 1 Corinthians 1:18? Let me look at 1 Corinthians 1:18 and see what it says. All right, 1:18, for the word of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved it is the power of God. Well, I don't have my critical Greek New Testament in front of me here, so I don't know if there are textual variants or
Maybe
why
he wants
this
to
is.
write back and tell us.
Yeah. All right, Joe Powers, Red Sox, Braves World Series next year. Hey, that sounds good. I'm calling it now. I'm a born and raised Bostonian. Thank you so much for answering me. I've read all your works and I'm honored. Bless you both. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate that. And hey, the Sox, they're a great team. I grew up in Baltimore, so I'm an Orioles fan as well. And man, you guys bruised us quite a bit. I'll never forget going to a game. I think it was 1976 or 1977. I think it was 76, actually, the year that the Red Sox went to the World Series against the Cincinnati Reds. And my grandfather and I were at the final game. I think it was the final game of the 76 regular season. And it went to the 10th inning. And Yaz, Carl Yastrzemski, hit a home run, put the Red Sox over the Birds by 1 run, and the Red Sox went on to win the division and I guess go on to the World Series where they lost. But yeah, the Red Sox Braves, that'd be a good World Series. Hopefully, maybe none of our teams will get a lot of injuries and we can see each other in the World Series. All right, Mike Beverly, Matt Hill and I've streamed about Luke. He's a great guy. Yeah. I told him to get on there with you, Michael. Glad you enjoyed him. But a very nice conversation. He was well received in my community. I'm talking to Ben. Fingers crossed. I want to talk to him. Reference his book. Yeah, Ben's a great guy. You'll like his personality too. He's a real humble guy
He really is.
and a tremendous fighter. Woo!
Don't mess around with them.
No, he's not a big guy, but you wouldn't want to mess with him. He's tough. All right, God bless you both in the audience. Thanks, Humble Clay. Jeff, Matthew 27, verses 52. Other people resurrected at the crucifixion. Was this real or a literary device? You want to answer that?
Yeah, we disagree. The question is not what happened, I don't think. The question is, what do we think Matthew thought happened? Mm-hmm. I think Matthew thought he was recording a historical event. Now, you don't say no. You just say kind of up in the air for you. Are you still there?
No, I think Matthew was I think he was doing these the portents like a lot of the others,
parable
like Josephus and Livy or Virgil and
Jo-
Philo and
Josephus,
Josephus
for sure.
did. So I think that's what's going on in order to say that you have the death of a great king here. That's what I think's going on. So then the follow-up question, let me just address that real quick. How do we know we're not doing that with Jesus' resurrection? Because these guys, every indication seemed that they really believed it. In fact, Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is worthless.
Let me add this is his area, the Greek. But countless number of skeptics will concede the following comment. The language of appearance, arao and so on, the language is the language of sight. You may not believe they thought they saw something, but that's the predominant view, that they were repeating what they thought they saw. You got to start with sight. You can't say, oh, there was this neat story, that then you're not dealing with the text.
Apollos, Christian Apologetics. Hey, thanks for the super chat. Appreciate that. And he says this, I'm anonymous online, but I've emailed you all in the past. Great seeing my childhood heroes. I'm about to be a Ratio Christi director at another school. Way to go, Apollos. Ratio Christi is a fantastic campus ministry, and we wish you all the best of that. Hey, if you want to do something once you get your group started, why don't you contact me again, and let's do a virtual meeting, and you can pipe me in for free, and I'll do something for your group there for free. To help you get started.
And you know, Apollos is a pretty cool name for starting out with talking about some tough apologetics with a guy who like lifts weights or something. I don't know what you do, but that's a good name.
All right, let's see. Here's one. I just can't. What's that? I can't pronounce it. So crazy how Jesus globally impacted the world like this. Amen, brother. Resurrection nerd, believing in a bodily resurrection is not equal to veridical appearances of the body.
What?
I'm not sure what you mean by that. You'll have to explain it a little bit more, Resurrection Nerd. All right. NIMET6986. I really wish YouTube notifications work. I will play this all back after the live feed. God bless you both. Your lives and your work mean more than you know to many more than you know. Hey, thanks a lot. Appreciate that. All right. I mean, guys, do you know the Doherty Carriers case for a pre-existing being, Jesus, Yeshua, in Zechariah, Dead Sea Scrolls, Philo, and the ascension of Eshan? No.
Dead Sea Scrolls.
No.
You have to be clear on the data here. What laid out the data?
A pre-existing being, Jesus. I know that Carrier says something about a Jesus who they think may have existed from outer space 100 years before Christ.
I was just thinking that earlier tonight. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, some of these views are. I mean, Anyway, I don't want to say anything.
If you're looking at probable theories, these aren't the first places to start for probability.
Okay, Life and Beyond. God bless you, Gary and Mike. Thank you so much for taking our questions tonight. You are welcome, Life and Beyond. Apollos, hey, thanks for the super chat again. Appreciate that. Also, can the coursework for HCU Masters in Early Christianity be done part-time in the evening while working a full-time job? I plan to thesis on Jesus apocalypticism and eschatology like Tucker S. Furda. Yes, our program at HCU in the master's degree, you can do that online or in person, and you can take it at your own pace. Can you do it at night? I don't know how some of the other courses work. I would think so. Generally speaking, the online classes, I mean, each professor is different. For me, I have the lectures and reading and stuff that you watch. You can do it at we don't have any time where we get on and it's like, you got to be on a specific time to be live. So, I mean, I interact with people and on their, we have it's called Blackboard, but we're switching over to something else. I think in the spring, or maybe it's for next year, we're switching over. But anyway, yeah. So, yeah, there's a lot of flexibility in what we have at HCU. So, I'd love to see you there. Resurrection Nerd, do any of the Damascus Road experience accounts in Acts say Paul or any of his companions actually saw a person or a physical body?
To get physical body, once again, it's an argument from the use of Gnosticis and Agero, and it's how that Tom Wright did this. It goes back hundreds of years before Christ, and he says Greco-Romans believed in spirits. They believe in ghosts. Because people say, well, they didn't believe in just body. No, they didn't, but they didn't say Gnosticis. They said pneuma. Paul says in Philippians chapter 3, he'll raise our vile soma, body, to be like unto his glorious pneuma. Sorry, I said it the other way around. He could have said glorious pneuma, but he said glorious soma, that we be like Jesus' glorious soma. And that's Paul. It's 1 Corinthians 15. It's Romans 8:11, one of your favorite verses. A lot of good text. Paul is
Plus
clear about believing in the resurrection of the
Thessalonians
body.
4:13-17.
That's a great text by Paul.
So a lot of it. Again, check out my short video. It's like, I don't know, 5 or 7 minutes about Paul's view of resurrection here at my YouTube channel.
Hey, and Mike's long book, starting on page 400, he's going to go on for 25 to 40 pages, giving an argument for resurrection of the body. Kind of hard to miss when you have that much data.
All right, Jaden Johnston, huge fan. Quick question: can I have an autograph?
Sure, right now.
Yeah, I guess come to something. We're going to be in San Diego. Well, you're not. I'm going to be in San Diego for ETS, SBL, and then I'm speaking at their Sound Faith 24 conference. You can go to soundfaith24.com, I think it is, and check out that conference in San Diego. It's going to happen the Friday and Saturday before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And I'll be there, and you can get, I can sign a book for you there. All right, Life and Beyond. What do you say, Gary and Mike? I can almost guarantee that the traditional inerrantists are going to get triggered when they hear this live stream. So be it. They won't get triggered at you. They'll get triggered at me, but I'm a big boy. I'm an adult. I got thick skin.
But I'm going to say again, if you use only the minimal facts, critics will say over and over again, the vast majority, critics say this, the vast majority believe in bodily appearances. Is it a minimal fact? If you have appearances, they're bodily. That's just what the word means. It's what the Greek means in the earliest traditions.
Okay, let's see. Richard Eng. Hey, Richard. He's a former student. He's really sharp. What is a recent objection to or alternate explanation of one of the minimal facts?
What's the explanation?
Recent objection. Can you give a recent objection to one of the minimal facts?
You want me to just make one up?
No, well, one that's given to it by a scholar.
Well, almost nobody says, for example, that
it's a minimal fact, so that means that the vast majority of scholars are going to grant them. But
yeah, there's a few people who believe that Jesus didn't die on the cross, and
you can count them on a single hand, right?
I mean, now you say that, and somebody finds 6. So that's the kind of thing where people do this. But you can get some people who say swoon. I was in a debate one time where an atheist, I kept pushing to pick a naturalistic theory. He said, I'm not going to. You're going to push me in the corner. I said, pick one, pick one. He goes, okay, the disciple stole the body. I mean, it does happen sometimes. And people who are not familiar with it are going to pick views that are not. And I cover them all. Volume 2, I have about over 100 pages of 19th century German liberalism. They use they're the big naturalistic theory period.
Okay.
And I give detailed refutations.
Here's Apollos Christian Apologetics again. What do you guys think about scholar consensus being influenced primarily by a woke agenda of admissions department and deans as opposed to good scholarship, especially at Ivy League? I'm not sure
I'm
how
missing
to
something.
understand. Well, let's put it this way. Scholarly consensus.
I would think most
scholars
people have another view, not the...
Even those, when we talk about the minimal facts,
Yep.
or let's just say the scholarly census on the traditional authorship of Mark and Luke Acts.
Sure.
I mean, my 2 former students have actually looked at people who are teaching at these woke
But they can take another
departments.
view if they want. They're free. And just because minimal facts are highly evidenced, what do we say? What have we said 5 times tonight? You can take another alternative interpretation. I think you're in trouble if you do it, but you're free to pick you can pick your own interpretation of the data.
Now, if you want to say, could it be that if you are teaching at one of these secular institutions like an Ivy League and they go woke, is there pressure put on you as a professor to take certain positions? Is there peer pressure? Yeah, there's going to be peer pressure. But that works at Christian institutions as well. I mean, if I were teaching at a Southern Baptist seminary, there would be pressure to adopt a hardline view of inerrancy. I mean, so yeah, Rob Bowman, my friend Rob Bowman, brilliant guy. He's got his PhD now, but he did all his coursework, his doctoral seminars for a PhD at Westminster Theological Seminary, was working on his dissertation, almost finished it, and then his supervisor retired. New guy came in. The ink on his PhD diploma was still wet. He didn't like Rob's dissertation because Rob took a classical evidential apologetics approach, whereas he was a full presuppositional and he wouldn't pass him. So, I mean, this kind of bias happens not only, it does happen at secular universities. I could give you examples of that, but it also happens at Christian seminaries and universities as well, unfortunately. You should get a degree based on your scholarship and whether you argue it well, not whether your supervisor agrees with you.
Here's the other view. I have given A's on papers where people have argued against the resurrection and against other ethical and positions that I hold. I give A's because the argument, the sake of the argument, not because based on whether I agree with what they're saying. And nobody at my school either makes me give them an A because they are, or a D or an F because they're not taking the. We have a tradition in our. You can disagree with some of the school doctrine and write a master's thesis, and you have a way to get out. We have a path for you to go.
Yeah, we got that too at HCU. In fact, I've given my students A's on research papers, and they take a position different than mine. You just have to argue it.
And I've even done that in the resurrection.
Okay, Apologetics 101. We really gotta we got to go through this. We got 15 minutes, and we're going to get off here. 1 Corinthians 1:18. I have checked my textual critical stuff. It doesn't appear to be one. If there is, it's very minor. The evidence in the Nestle Aland is very good. Okay, David VR. Any guesses on what happened to Lazarus after his resurrection? I've read that he traveled to Gaul, southern France, and was there. All right, what do you think? I haven't heard anything.
Here's the problem. All that kind of junk is late. I've got a section in one of my books on Jesus is the international traveler, and there was one myth that he died in in India, and the town points out his grave outside the town where he lived to be like 125 years old. You can find that stuff all over the place. Here's the major problem. Not that I don't like it or Mike doesn't like it. The major view is you don't have historical data that show that to be true. Same rules we use, these don't satisfy it.
Matthew, when are arguments from silence acceptable when working with the scant sources we have from antiquity?
I think I'd be very careful. Sometimes an argument is strictly an argument from silence, but there is a lean. You can tell from the text that they're leaning this other way. You have to do what certain things do. I don't like arguments from silence, and I will say this is an argument from silence, but I think there's something here to be thought about, but I don't put those arguments to the head of the class. Don't do it.
Okay. And I would say, an argument from silence, you want to avoid them, but I think that they can have some merit to them when you expect something to be there, but it's not.
And it's the opposite.
Yeah. All right. Sanctus, is there a generally agreed view of philosophy of history? For example, do most scholars reject Hume's methodology of history?
I just did 2 long chapters on Hume in the present volume, both what Hume said and what's happened to Hume all the way up to today. The predominant view that I've been able to find among scholars writing, the best one by a skeptic is Hume's Abject Failure is the name of the book. And go ahead and get it. But I understand from my reading, most scholars think 2 things about Hume. The trend today is to say he was a theist, not an atheist. That might surprise you. A theist. And secondly, they disagree with his argument from probability. They think he uses induction. I could explain it, but we don't have time. Hume makes mistakes on how he applies induction. If you blow the induction argument, you lose his argument against miracles.
Okay, so I've got one more here that I'm seeing from Jaden Johnston. So if you have some more questions, we'll have about 10 more minutes. So get them in right now. Jaden says, okay, actual question. Would Bart Ehrman and other people that have left the faith be an example of someone falling away in Hebrews 6? Love your debates with him. Also looking good, Gary.
I would say ask Bart. See, already several times tonight, I'm very slow to put words in somebody. If it's not in print, I've given up Dom Crossan's view, other people's views. If they don't say it in print or it's not in a dialogue or it's out there, I don't like to say somebody believes this, somebody believes that. So I don't know what Bart thinks about that. I know people who think if you were once saved, you're always saved, and you have a number of people who say, nope, you walk away, and Bart himself would say he's not a believer. I think that's fair.
Oh yeah, Bart has said for a while, that he's an agnostic atheist.
He's called himself both ways.
And I think recently he's now just saying he's an atheist. But yeah, it's hard. You just can't tell where a person's heart is.
And we don't always know where our hearts are.
Yeah.
That's why Scripture says it over and over, examine yourselves. That includes us too.
Bart has said on several occasions, he said in his book, God's Problem. He said it to Alex McFarland before my debate with him back in 2008. And I know he said it elsewhere that he often wakes up at night in fear of hell. I think he has good reason to do that as well. Because if Christianity is true, that's where Bart is headed. And I mean, I don't like that. I'd love to see him come back to the Lord, and I've told him that. And, the parable of the prodigal son, God would love to see him come back. It just seems to me, as I've seen him over the years, he seems open at some point to some of this, and then it seems like he digs his heels into the ground, and maybe he'll just get to a point where it's just he passes that point of no return, and God just hardens his heart, and he just can't come back. I don't know. Let's hope he hasn't. If that is possible, let's hope that he has not received that. I'd love to see Bart come back for the kingdom. I love the guy. Consider him a friend. Yeah. All right. Let's see. This is from Pedro. Hello, Licona and Habermas. I'm Pedro Henrique from Brazil, and I met you literally 3 weeks ago through my research. I'm already devouring all the books. You helped me strengthen my faith. Thank you. Glad to hear it, Pedro. He's talking to you too.
He's talking to me too?
Yes, he is.
If you're talking to me, congratulations. We're glad. We are glad to have you use it. You don't agree with us? That's fine. That's your right. You do? Thank you.
All right, Sanctus, what's your thoughts on Raymond Brown's scholarship on gospel authorship? I'm not even sure what is his. He was a great scholar.
When I went to school, grad school, many moons ago, Rudolf Bultmann had just died. 1976. He was the most influential scholar at that time. Raymond Brown is one of the Americans that moved to the head of the list. He's at Union Theological Seminary, a great scholar. He generally is very fair and more than moderate. I'd say he's
moderate conservative.
Moderate plus, moderate conservative. Oh, by the way, in a book that he wrote shortly before he died, it's called Introduction to New Testament Christology. He surveyed the field. Critics don't like people surveying the field, but tell Raymond Brown that. We do it, they get on us. Raymond does it, nobody criticizes him. Raymond said in the field, he maps out 4 views toward Christology. And he says the most common view today, doesn't prove it's right, the most common view today, he calls it careful conservatism. He's got an adjective there, but it's something with conservatism. And he says, by his definition, this means most scholars today believe Jesus had a personal Christology. And you have to read him for what he says. He thinks Jesus is called God in the New Testament. He thinks there's a number of verses where Jesus declared deity. He was one of the foremost American scholars till he died just before the turn of the century.
All right. Question, how strongly do you two think the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is Jesus' actual tomb and crucifixion site? Thanks for your time, brothers in Christ.
Very few scholars get in dialogues about where the tomb is. But almost nobody thinks it's the garden tomb that you see in trips. There are a few, could give names, but there are a few that say if they had to pick, they would go for the Holy Sepulchre. It fulfills the archaeological date of a church being built there. You have to go down real far to find the grave. And hey, this isn't my tradition, but check out the Holy Fire arguments or what happens on Easter Day. Just fun. Go look at them online. Holy Fire.
I attended a paper last year at the Society of Biblical Literature, and I think it was San Antonio is where we were at. It was an archaeologist, historian, and he's not sure about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre or whether that's the actual one. And the crucifixion site, he said, it might be, but it could be anywhere within that vicinity. He says, we in his opinion, we just couldn't know. And I thought he made some pretty decent arguments to say they're both in that vicinity, but we can't be sure that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the crucifixion site of Golgotha is...
Golgotha is a little more questionable, but those who pick it, they're very few, but those who pick it like the Holy Sepulchre.
Okay, Nikki.
Usually.
Nikki had the chance to learn in an OCC class led by Dr. Stephen C. Meyer. Boy, he's a good guy. We had a guest lecturer, Jonathan McClatchy. I teach the apologetics class at my church. He has a maximal data approach. Thoughts?
I've not read them.
Yeah, look again. I think it's just pettifogging. It's like if you want to use maximal data, that's great. A friend of mine, Tawa Anderson, who's a philosophy professor at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, he gave a paper at ETS last year, and he was saying, yeah, but what happens when if something changes in the future and some of these minimal facts, scholars don't accept that anymore? Well, great. Well, if that happens, well, they're certainly not going to accept the maximal facts because you'll have even less for that. So, look. My approach is a little bit different than Gary's. I like to do like minimal facts in that way, but I will go beyond them. I will talk about how Paul and the early Christians believed in the bodily resurrection of Jesus, and even if you don't have a vast majority, which maybe you do, but I was arguing that, even not thinking that the vast majority of that held that. I'm fine challenging that, but if you want to do maximal data, great. Look, it's like Philippians chapter 1. Paul said, some to be sure are preaching Christ even from envy and rivalry, but some also from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, thinking that I'm appointed for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition rather than from pure motives. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed. In this I rejoice. Well, look, I'm not saying the maximal data people are deceptive in any way, but what I'm saying, if Paul can say this about those who are preaching the true gospel, but are doing it out of rivalry to Paul,
right.
So they're doing it out of poor and ungodly reasons, if he can still rejoice that the gospel is being preached, I don't care if you'd use a maximal data or minimal facts approach, just preach the gospel and quit pettifogging over these different ways of doing it. If you want to do it your way. That's all I got to say about it. It just makes me angry that folks like McClatchy and the McGrews and others are causing division over this. It's like, good night. We're all on the same team here. Just go out and preach the gospel. All right. Dissatisfied philosophy. Licona and Habermas, I sincerely am asking why evangelical scholars don't become Anglican or even Orthodox or Catholic. This seems to solve the problem of Scripture's tensions. It does? I don't know.
I did make a comment real early in this talk tonight. One of my best friends is a Russian Orthodox retired hierarchy person with PhD in philosophy. And he and I both agree what you do with Christ is more important than the name of your church over your door. You got to think about who you are, where you are with Christ. And it's an extension of the previous question. Don't worry about splitting hairs and where people are. Ask your question. When Jesus said to the disciples, are you going to leave me now after a bunch of people left? Are you going to leave me now to the disciples? And Peter said, to whom else do we turn? You're the one with the words of eternal life. That's what we should be celebrating.
All right. No more questions. Let me answer just those that are, but please don't type any new ones. And we'll answer these that are here. Dissatisfied philosophy. One can easily solve these by appealing to later traditions, since the Bible is merely a facet of tradition, and this solves literally all the problems from the theological perspective. I don't think so, because traditions between Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestants can disagree. All right. Thanks for doing this. This is from Jeff. Thanks for doing this. Awesome answers. Thank you, Jeff. Nikki, the rest of my question. McClatchy says it's completely different. I see it as complementary. Thoughts? I agree. Complementary.
I agree.
All right. Thought Decoder with Sean Mixon. How can I hang out with you guys? Hey, well, check us out. If you come to ETS or SBL, It's in San Diego this year. We will be there, or I will be there. You won't be there
I've got
this
a
year.
previous appointment in Houston at lecturing at a big conference down there.
So best thing to do is just check out, see what conferences we're at, come out and hang out, and maybe we can break bread together. All right. Bran of raisin. I like raisin bran. I like this. I do. It tastes good. This has been a very interesting forum. It would be cool to see if you have another one in the future, or maybe you have had one in the past. We haven't done like this with live Q&A with Gary.
We did one a couple years ago with
with David
Braxton.
Braxton, okay. Braxton's a great guy. Check out his channel on YouTube, Trinity Radio.
His is on my YouTube site, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
The interview we did then.
It's probably on mine too. We'll try to do this every year, and maybe I'll try to do this more often. I'll bring some others here. There's some great people here in the Atlanta area where I live, and maybe I can connect and do something with them. Thought Decoder with Sean Mix. Okay, please, no more. I'm going to take these. No, don't do any more comments. Or I'll tell you what. If you want to do any more comments, you got to do a super chat. All right, Thought Decoder. This approach is person specific. Okay. All right, Nikki. Okay, interesting. Thank you. That's the idea of maximal data. I'm actually doing minimal facts, then touching the other. Good for you, Nikki. Addison Weir. Hey, thanks for the super chat, Addison. Is Dr. Habermas going to respond to Apologia and Bart Ehrman's criticisms? They argued that he misrepresents the latter.
I disagree. A guy, after I defended my view, a guy wrote to me and gave me between 10 and 20 page numbers where the quote that I made is over and over. I'm sticking by what I do. I don't respond to sources like that. It's not like I respond to the ones I want, not the others. Try to see how many you can find. While I'm doing this big thing right now, I'm not doing much of anything because of these volumes. By the way, Bill Craig did respond to that. He did respond to the dialogue concerning me and him vis-a-vis those two fellows. You can see it on my website. I think you can see it on Bill's website. It's a two-part critique.
All right. Here's Thought Decoder. They say that the difference between maximal and minimal is that the latter, minimal, doesn't describe the vertical nature of the appearances.
They always say that. I don't know why. They don't read the data. How's that? I'll just say it blandly. Read the data instead of running your mouths.
Pedro, lately some questions have arisen for me about free will. What is your position on this? And if you believe it, how do you deal with some neuroscientific studies that prove otherwise?
To prove what?
That we don't have free will.
Okay. Well,
if we don't have free will, you'd never know it. You can't,
And you wouldn't be able to judge the studies, for crying out loud.
Yeah, why are you even asking that question? You were pre-programmed for it, right?
If you're pre-programmed, you wouldn't even know. C.S. Lewis says if we were, never mind. C.S. Lewis said you would never know those things if you were.
All right. Well, let's see. All right. I got to skip some of these because they came after we said don't do any more. All right. Let's see. Julie, she says, thank you both so much for the time and sharing your wisdom. Thank you, Julie. Let's see. Anyone? All right. Jesus is risen, coming with great power and glory. Amen. Can't wait for that to happen. Hey, thanks, folks. Nice. Do you have any closing comments, Gary?
Yeah, you know what? I'll make one. And here it is. From 1799 to date, Friedrich Schleiermacher and all his liberal kin, all the way up to the present, the number one criticism of Christianity is that there are discrepancies in the Gospels. The number one, if you just do head count. It's amazing how many people actually believe there's discrepancies and still believe Jesus appeared. The problem is, if you define the Gospel the way the New Testament does, and involves the deity, death, resurrection of Jesus, the discrepancies don't touch it. They don't you can find things around the edges, but they don't disprove the events. So that's why people can allow these problems and still make a positive decision for the resurrection. And here's what I'll end with. If Christ is the Son of God who died on the cross, rose from the dead, Christianity is true. Think about that. Mm-hmm. Deity, death, resurrection, Christianity is true, period. I'll stand with that.
Amen. Hey, thanks. This has been fun.
It's been fun.
Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. any technical difficulties or ways that this may not have moved smoothly. Sorry about that. This is my first time doing this on my own. And so God bless you all. Hopefully we'll have some more like this in the future. You all have a good night.